Hi, everyone. This is Angel Leon, and this is the show Minority Mavericks. And as you know, this is a show where we tell the stories of all minority mavericks out there, your investors, founders, and entrepreneurs of this world. And in today's episode, we have Manan Mehta, founding partner from Unshackled Ventures, and I'm really excited to have him on the show. Welcome to the show, Manan.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
No worries. Thank you, Manan, for taking the time and telling your story. And to that, and I wanted to basically just start this conversation by asking you about your background. So if you want to be able to, introduce yourself to the audience, tell us your personal journey and how you got to this point where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, as it may be obvious to many people and by introductions, I am a venture capitalist, but a lot of my passion and inspiration for what I do today goes back to being a kid born and raised in Silicon Valley, where I felt like an outsider. I was born in the 1980s, one of very few Indian kids in my neighborhood at my schools, and I played sports, which made it even a smaller population of Indian kids when I think about it. And I was fortunate to be quite good at sports, and had the opportunity to walk on to the UCLA baseball team.
Nice.
And there's a very interesting moment where in my second year of trying out for the team, I overheard the head coach jokingly speak to another coach, asking, "Where is this guy's flat stick?" Referencing a cricket bat. And at the time, it wasn't very offending at all, because he was very used to a lot of those kind of jokes and things going up. But it crystallized years later as there was a pattern bias that existed within the world of sports and baseball that an Indian kid did not fit. Mm-hmm. And I remember that really well as really the starting point of my journey of trying to develop enough skills that if an opportunity arose to be in a position to invest, support, coach, guide, mentor, or just collaborate with anyone who was affected by traditional pattern matching, I would do it. And so, long story short, my career allowed me to be an investment banker for a few years. I ran marketing for an education technology company that ultimately led me to try to start a business with an immigrant co-founder. And it was in that journey I was reminded of some of the pattern biases where my co-founder, who was a visa holder, specifically on an H-1B visa, couldn't go full-time on our startup. And this was back in 2013. And many investors would look at that as, if he can't go full-time, then he must not be committed. When the actuality was that it was actually really hard due to visa constraints and employment constraints. And so, a lot of what I strive to do and what the work that I get a lot of passion from at Unshackled is to bet on the underdog, bet on the person that pattern biases don't tend to find. And I'm very lucky, last 10 years, we get to be the first check in immigrants or immigrant-led businesses. Oftentimes people that feel a lot like I was when I was 18, 19 years old trying out for baseball. Just needed someone to give you a chance, and greatness would arise.
That's very cool, Manan. And I'm a fan of what you guys do, not just because it's a minority world, but it's an even more minority world that I believe it's even harder for immigrants, right? There's minorities, and then there's other issues related to just this social political aspect, right, of being from other countries specifically, right, not just a minority here in the U.S., born and raised here in the U.S. So it's really interesting the work you do, and interesting again your story as well, how you started from something and you navigated all these spaces, right, to become the investor that you are today. So I really appreciate that. And to that note there, so many minority and immigrant entrepreneurs and companies and startups, right, they encounter difficulties related to access to capital, networking, and other systemic biases. How does you and or Unshackled Ventures, right, address these challenges in the investment strategy that you put forward?
It's a really good question. I think it starts with, recognizing there is unimaginable human potential in these people, and oftentimes is unrealized for only one reason, is because their stories began elsewhere. There's something about having a passport with an eagle on the front of it that makes us, really feel like we can do a lot.
Right.
But if you come to the United States with no connections, clubs, or clout, you're oftentimes starting back on zero.
Yeah.
And so for us, we look at that as original perspectives, unique life experiences, and existential motivation. And I think that is, oftentimes why immigrants and immigrant founders have been so successful. And so for us, because their stories began elsewhere, the way we think about it is, how do we learn about those stories before the United States? And I think that allows us to do something that is unique in that we underwrite, their potential, and really try to do what we can to help them reach their peak and be a champion of immigrant entrepreneurs. And I think that's where, you've seen the story of America. It's written through the story of immigrants.
Definitely.
And so for us, it just makes a lot of sense to go back and really appreciate why they left their home country, what they did to get here, and why they're willing to go back to zero, not just to start a startup, but to start a new life.
A new life, yeah.
And that's what this is all about, and that's what the promise of America really is. And so, we really do believe in this idea that, for many immigrants, this is, when we invest in them, this is not their first company. Their first company oftentimes existed in their home country and how they got here. Their first entrepreneurial act in America is going through border patrol to get into the country. Right? They left their home country. That's an entrepreneurial act of deep discomfort.
Yeah.
And I think it reflects that untrammeled aspirations of an immigrant and making a better life. And that's what we underwrite.
That's very cool. Yeah, I love that analogy for sure, or that sentiment behind the entrepreneurial just aspect of just making a decision, right, of leaving your country for something better or for something greater. I've never honestly saw it like that. That's very, very, very cool. So I appreciate that. And can you highlight maybe a specific example? And again, you don't have to mention brands or names, but just of a company that started you work with, right, that face a lot of these exceptional challenges that other startups don't necessarily face, and how Unshackled Ventures intervene with them to help them overcome these obstacles.
Yeah, I think a lot about one particular person. It was our third investment back in 2015, third investment ever of Unshackled, and she's the founder and CEO of a company called Lily AI. You'll notice I said she as well. Purva has been on 8 different visa types before she could get her green card.
Wow.
There's a Fast Company article that came out about her titled "Pocket Full of Visas."
Okay. Wow.
What I think is oftentimes underappreciated and overlooked is what sort of commitment and discipline is required to go through not just the 8 different visa types, but the cost, the time, the energy.
Yes.
And if we believe that those attributes are the marks of great entrepreneurs, then it's not really about where she was born and school she went to. It's actually much more about the resiliency and the existential motivation that I spoke to earlier that is worth looking at. And so for us, what it really was about taking away that time and energy burden of navigating the U.S. immigration system, all while being separated from her husband.
Wow.
And, it's hard enough for women to raise VC funding. It's, perhaps statistically even harder for immigrant women to raise money in this country. And so our biggest focus is how do we provide not just the capital, not just the immigration support, but also the community support to ultimately realize that what really drives venture in Silicon Valley ideals is the idea of the right people at the right time. And so how do we help with that? Because at the end of the day, whatever the reason was for you to leave your home country, whether by choice or force, right now, obviously we're experiencing a lot of forced movement in the world. The hardest part may be that, but then you're met with a new country without any community. That can become the source of a lot of pain and suffering. And so if we can do what we can to support that part of the human journey, or the human entrepreneurial journey, I think we're doing our job. And that's what we focus on in Shackled, is unlocking the potential through immigration and capital, but then supporting the next 10 to 20 years through community and resources.
That is an amazing story, Manan. And it's basically navigating, right, two very not equal spaces, and they're both as hard and right and unequal, right, as each other in that way. So there's two different challenges, right, for just one person, right? That's a lot of different, definitely, like you said, resiliency, and that's one of the main issues, right? That or not issue, but one of the main things that we actually have as minority groups. I feel that we have a lot of resiliency. Just because of different challenges, right, that we face through our lives and different countries, right, when we're talking about people that move to different places. So, and in terms of that and that story that you told us just now, I think it comes with, the topic of immigrant advantage, right, and where we say that immigrants bring this unique perspective and resilience, right, to their business. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how this advantage plays a role in the success of the startups you funded?
Yeah, I love that. The notion of and the positivity that comes from the language that you're using, Angel, immigrant advantage. Because it doesn't always feel that way for many immigrants, right? It can sometimes feel like, because they don't have that passport with an eagle on the front of it, it feels like a big disadvantage, right? Yeah. And so I love the subversion and the positivity of it, because I really think about, ultimately the entrepreneurial journey is a series of uncomfortable events with the hope of some good luck on the other end of it.
Right.
But you create your good luck and good outcome by having this real maximizing quality about you, right? Where you can turn small gains into huge wins. Yeah. It's through sheer force of work and that unusual discipline. It's and knowing that there's no matter how hard it gets, the only way to success is through. And I think that is what you're talking about, the immigrant advantage. It's this discipline, it's this grit, it's resilience. Yeah. And for us at Unshackled, I think it really speaks to the core of our belief, which is people solve problems, not businesses. And when you are on the outside, you can start to realize that much of the United States is a national advantage is actually immigrants. So I'm a believer that immigrants are our national advantage as a country. And we don't need to look that far. I mean, the history of America is written by the story of immigrants. And whether you look at industries that are core to our country's well-being, food, agriculture, transportation, or you're looking at industries that go a little beyond into retail and consumer, we have across the board somebody innovating in those spaces, and that gives me a lot of joy. And then you think about our healthcare system, deeply complex, deeply complicated, and deeply layered in bureaucracy and challenge. Immigrants, because of their pathways, are willing to take that on. And I'm not saying only immigrants, but in my view, that's what we underwrite. I think there's a lot of people of different characteristics that we are talking about that may not be immigrants that would do it as well. But I think there's something unique about a population that has left their home country willing to go on and challenge what's ahead of them, and our job is to accelerate them.
Definitely, that's great. And yeah, I mean, I do, come from a background like that. I'm from Puerto Rico, originally born and raised. So me moving to the U.S., even though Puerto Rico as a land, right, it's part of the United States, but our culture is so different, right? We're more Caribbean, right, and we bring our own laws and we have our own internal things. So coming into the U.S., it was kind of a struggle for me. When I first came in, I didn't know the language to begin with, and my first thing was to go to school. So I was in college here. I had no idea how to speak English. So I'm here just sitting in a room full of people. I have no idea what anyone's saying. So that was, part of the...
Can I just jump in? I mean,
yeah.
Just look at your own story. Like, think about what sort of comfort you had to find in uncomfortable to now be sitting here with a podcast when all we hear is your voice.
Yeah, definitely.
That is an incredible persistence and resiliency and tolerance for pain and suffering and an internal challenge. You may not have seen it that way because you knew you only had one way to go.
Right.
But I think at the abstract level, it's an incredible aptitude. I think that's what this is all about. It's pushing through and being comfortable with discomfort to reach a better place. So kudos to you. That's amazing. I didn't know that, so I really appreciate learning that, because that's hard.
Yeah, and after that, I joined the military, the U.S. Navy, and I was put in a 1 month in boot camp there for like a language, school. And then after that, they just throw you to open water. Then you have to figure your way out. So yeah, it's and I know that a lot of minority people have the same passion, and I think that's exactly what you see in them, and that's why you are willing to invest in them, right? A lot of people understand that investors don't necessarily only invest in the company or the product or whatever, right? It's also about that founder, about that person, and you're investing, right, your time, your money, all of your expertise that you have created and built throughout years, right, into this one single person. So I understand, completely, right, the idea of Unshackled Ventures, and again, just the way that you brought it up a couple of times, like I never saw it that way. Just me leaving my country is, that's a huge step in my life, and it's a entrepreneurial decision. I'm leaving to go get something greater, and build a better life.
And it's not just leaving. It's what it took to get the courage to leave. Right? It's both mental, physical, and then your family, your education. You had to do so many more things. So it wasn't just a moment you woke up and said, "Let's go."
Right.
You had to commit, and that unusual discipline, I think, is the hallmark of. And I'll now say this as well, having what you referenced. I think entrepreneurs and a lot of our military vets represent a lot of the similar discipline. The unusual discipline that is part of the culture of being part of those communities.
Definitely. And Manan, I want to ask you a question about specifically the social political climate right now. There's all these evolving immigration policies, right, that we see in the news, and yet Unshackled Ventures, right, is still targeting immigrants, right? So it would be interesting to understand, how is it that Unshackled Ventures is adapting to these policies and this climate, and to be able to keep supporting not just new, right, entrepreneurs and companies that are coming in, but your current portfolio as well.
Yeah, look, it's a really great question, and I think the reason why we've been able to do what we do, it's very philosophical, that we focus on people, not the circumstances. When you do that, there's actually a lot of consistency in what we believe. You can have an 88-year-old immigrant or an 18-year-old immigrant, and a lot of the same things at the people level are the exact same. And so when I have so much topography to look at, I have so much data to look at in generational, to look at the people experience, it's actually not that hard to adapt to circumstantial changes. And it gives us a very solid and sound footing to respond to the needs of people. And so it's, global politics, geopolitics are always going to shift. That is also true in the last 90 years. It has always happened.
Right.
So there's a constance to that change that I think is embedded in the immigrant story. And so it's more about providing a stable and unifying platform of knowledge when there's things that are very hyperbolic or emotional, and being just a steady hand. And so what we keep on doing is, just like our founders can do extremely well, is go with the flow. Like that's what makes an immigrant an immigrant. And they understood the rules of the game, and then they kept on adapting to get to the point where they can win. However it is, right? Win and success could be just having my family here. Win and success could be having a generational company and a generational wealth. Or win and success could just be a better life for my kids. But that all requires adapting and understanding the rules of the game. And so all we do is represent what our founders do, is just a curiosity to learn and play the game a little bit better by knowing the rules, by playing it harder.
Definitely, Manan. And thanks for the answer. I really appreciate it. And it was great having you here. I think we had a very good conversation. I really appreciate the different ways that you have, different perspectives of seeing things, and kind of like open my mind to seeing things and just exploring other ways to identify my own story as well as a minority person in this country myself. And your story is a great story, and all these challenges, right? You were able to navigate through all that. So I would love for just this last maybe 30 seconds or a minute here, if you can just give any aspiring minority entrepreneur, founder, or investor out there, talk to them and just tell them a quick advice.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes Unshackled so important for me in the work we do is because we really aim to be the social signal that other people follow. And so part of our strategy from the very beginning has been to be the first one in, the friends and family money, the one that was willing to take the risk alongside the person taking the bigger risk, which is the entrepreneur. And so what I encourage everyone to do is to look at really where you sit within your industry, within your vertical, and ask yourself, how much of a leader can you be? How much you are, and how much more can you be? Because I think what really comes down to is being willing and able to be the leader, to then give rise to the people around you that will then follow in your wake. And so, we haven't really talked much about the investment strategy, but Unshackled invests 75% of the time before the company is even incorporated. And so we are talking about betting on people with multiple ideas frequently. And I think the best way to look at it is we are trying to be the friends and family capital stack for immigrants in this country.
Okay.
And the reason we do that is because we want to be the first one. We wanted to expand the entrepreneurial pie. And so I only share that as an example, not to, pound our chest and suggest that we are doing it right, but rather to say, if you stick with it, you will actually be able to add more people into the ecosystem. You'll actually grow the pie. You'll actually support more diverse populations. And by virtue of that, more minorities. And so I really always ask people to ask those fundamental questions. How can you lead? How much you're leading, and how much more can you lead?
Very cool. And thanks for that too. And thanks for you're the first guest on the show that actually answers give that more advice directly to the investors rather to the founders. So I really appreciate that because we haven't had that, and I love that because I believe that other investors, right, in the industry can actually learn from other ones that are not necessarily, it's not about the money, right, necessarily, but just about the type of initiatives like yours, right, that you're bringing up to the table. So really appreciate that, Manan. And this was Minority Mavericks, the show where you hear all the stories about all minority founders, entrepreneurs, and investors out there. And in today's show, we had Manan Mehta from Unshackled Ventures. And thanks again, Manan, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.